makes sense, right? You were at one time the president of the United States. You hold a lot of power and have a very strong network. However, again, we've got to look into this and figure this out. Under the Trump administration, we had a lot of dealings with family members. Same under, as Orlando mentioned, the Clinton Foundation. So, hopefully this is something that the Democrats will and Republicans, bipartisanly will look into, get to the bottom of, no matter what, and hopefully moving forward, set up some steps that can safeguard this country. Because if the only thing we can agree on is that everybody's a little corrupt or has their hand somewhere, I don't think we're on the right path. And hopefully we can get back to really working on both domestic and international issues that are affecting the general public.
I'm glad you call a spade, Christina. I've always appreciated that about you. On that note, many thanks to you, Christina and Orlando, for participating in this very democratic discussion. And with that, I shift focus to news coming from the war front, but this again is coming from the United States. The White House has now stated that it estimates that Russia has suffered more than 100,000 casualties, including over 20,000 soldiers killed in action as Ukraine rebuffed a heavy assault by Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, especially Bakhmut, in the last few months. These new figures suggest the Russian losses have dramatically accelerated in recent months, while Russia is struggling to encircle the city of Bakhmut in the face of Ukrainian defense. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby has said that nearly half of those killed since December are Wagner forces, many of them convicts who were released from prison to join Russia's fight. Kirby has highlighted that the Wagner forces were thrown into combat and without sufficient combat or combat training, combat leadership, or even a sense of organizational command and control. Kirby has declined to say how many Ukrainian troops have been killed or wounded in this fighting. Also, US General Mark Milley has said in November that Ukrainian casualties were probably also about 100,000. In the meantime, let me also play out what the National Security spokesperson John Kirby had to say.
For Russia, this attempted effort, particularly in Bakhmut, has come at a terribly, terribly high cost. Russia has exhausted its military stockpiles and its armed forces. And since December alone, and remember now, some of the shelling and fighting over Bakhmut goes well back before December, but just since December, we estimate that Russia has suffered more than 100,000 casualties, including over 20,000 killed in action, nearly half of whom were Wagner soldiers, the majority of whom were Russian convicts that were thrown into combat in Bakhmut without sufficient combat combat training, combat leadership, or any sense of organizational command and control.
All right, let me also bring in former U.S. intelligence officer and American writer Glenn Carl, who's joining me live from the United States. Many thanks to you, Mr. Carl, for joining in. Now, as per U.S. intel estimates, Russia's attempt at an offensive in the Donbass, largely through Bakhmut, has failed. What does it mean for Russia's winter offensive and the declining artillery as is being reported?
All the experts from the UK, from NATO, from the United States, journalists who follow this concur that the offensive by the Russians has caused a lot of casualties, but has not seized almost any territory and has now largely petered out, although intense fighting, of course, continues every day. The thing, 100,000 casualties is terrible in one battle area, the Bakhmut area, of course, but Russia does have 143 million people population, and half of those casualties are predominantly from the Wagner private army, really, and many of them are prisoners. Many of the other casualties are from the non-Russian parts of Russia, from Siberia and so on. So the Russian population in and around Moscow and St. Petersburg has been largely insulated from this, and the Russians seem able to continue for a long time.
After Russian troops retreated from Kiev and were pushed out of southern Kherson and away from eastern Kharkiv, Bakhmut became a focus of the Russian military. Does that mean that the fight for Bakhmut has now become largely symbolic than strategic, if it is to be believed that Russia is on the back foot?
Yeah, well, it's a dangerous task to try to see into the strategic plans and mind of Vladimir Putin. The NATO, Ukraine, the United States have for well over a year from before the invasion offered a number of rational ways for Russia to declare success and to end the conflict, and Putin doesn't reason in the same way. So Bakhmut seems to have become, as you say, this symbolic objective. One could surmise that if the Russians succeeded in seizing Bakhmut, they could then say that they had conquered most of Donbass and had achieved their objectives in protecting Russia, and then move towards perhaps seeking some negotiation. But that's a rational assessment, and perhaps this is just a testosterone-laden test of wills. And I'm not being facetious. I don't know if it is as rational as I just said a moment ago.
All right. Mr. Karl, I'm going to request you to continue staying with me. In the meantime, I'd like to play the other half of what John Kirby had to say. In fact, he's gone on to reiterate how the Ukrainian army led by the Western Front has been able to successfully thwart Russia's attempts to annex more regions. And when we say that, they mean territorially. Because remember, Putin had already announced those annexations, but have they been able to happen on the ground level or not? Let's also listen in to what John Kirby had to say. In the meantime, I'll in fact quickly be also going back to Mr. Glenn Karl.
Russia's attempt at an offensive in the Donbass, largely through Bakhmut, has failed. Last December, Russia initiated broad operations across multiple lines of effort, including towards Volodar, Advika, Bakhmut, and Kreminna. Most of these efforts have stalled and failed. Russia has been unable to seize any real strategically significant territory. The only area where Russia has made some incremental gains, and I want to focus on the word incremental, is in Bakhmut. And that really holds, as we've said before, very little strategic value for Russia. The capture of Bakhmut would absolutely not alter the course of the war in Russia's favor. And Ukraine's defenses in the areas surrounding Bakhmut still remain strong. The bottom line is that Russia's attempted offensive has backfired. After months of fighting and extraordinary losses, Russia continues to be focused on a single Ukrainian city with limited strategic value. Ukraine's armed forces are defending their territory bravely and effectively and making Russia expend enormous resources for marginal gains. The world and battlefield momentum remain on Ukraine's side, and we will continue to support Ukraine, as the president has said, for as long as it takes.
All right, Mr. Karl, you heard what John Kirby has to say. It's rather ironic that the only incremental move coming from Russia has been the offensive so far. Having said that, it's also being talked about now that Putin has never lost in war before, neither in Chechnya nor in Georgia, not even in Syria. Will Ukraine be any different?
Well, Ukraine's a lot different because it's much larger, and NATO and the United States, being one and the same essentially, are deeply involved. So the equation is much, much different than a large Russian bear attacking a country of 2 million people, or I forget what the population of Georgia is, or Azerbaijan or Armenia are, but very, very small without different. But what Admiral Kirby didn't add, I think, is, and I think everything he said is accurate from what we can tell, but what he didn't add is what seems to be part of Putin's calculation, which is that by simply continuing the war, the essential unity that is required for Ukraine of NATO and European allies could fray, and pressure could build on Ukraine to seek less than the total withdrawal of Russian soldiers. And that's not that's a rational calculation on the part of Putin. We don't know how it will play out, but that seems to be the strategy he's pursuing.
All right, Mr. Karl, Ukraine was bombarded with the mightiest air raids in months. That too just days after Chinese President Xi Jinping and Zelensky had a phone call, their first ever since the war began. Is China's role or is China's new role now as a peacemaker going to change much in terms of the reality of the war?
Well, I certainly would not characterize China's role as that of a peacemaker. That is what China is trying to position itself to have everyone say and perceive. And they would play the role of a peacemaker if it could be on terms that are at least somewhat favorable to Russia. But China's role is to appear as a peacemaker and to pursue its ends in its strategic competition with the United States. Russia is a useful ally, so it does not want to see Putin humiliated or replaced by someone who would be much more difficult to work with or less subservient almost to China. And he doesn't want to see the United States triumph. That's China's game rather than being a peacemaker.
Right, and that is China's game. And on that note, before I end, does Beijing's stance actually matter for Moscow, and why so?
Oh, critically. Without China, and frankly without India, Russia would have probably lost now. But India's economic support and China's economic and diplomatic alliance are critical to Russia's war aims and activities in Ukraine.
All right. Many thanks to you, Mr. Karl. It's been a pleasure to have you on my show. And with that, I shift focus over to the Met Gala. Here are glimpses from the season's grandest fashion event, the Met Gala of 2023. An evening that was full of glitz, glamour and grandeur saw celebrities and icons from across the world walking in the season's most magnificent outfits, themed on the line of beauty of the late German designer Karl Lagerfeld. Celebrities could be seen paying homage to his work of art, while the usual celebrities, the Kardashians, Rihanna, Gigi Hadid, to name a few, made their attendance clad in absolutely stunning outfits. There were quite a few outrageous and even catty appearances. Yes, we're talking about Jared Leto and Doja Cat, both who were seen in variations of cat costumes, as you all know, was a tribute to Karl Lagerfeld's cat. Meanwhile, Indian icons could also be seen flaunting the carpet with their fabulous looks. Priyanka Chopra Jonas was spotted twining with her husband in a black Valentino gown, while Alia Bhatt made her debut appearance in a Prabal Gurung white gown embellished with pearls. Isha Ambani too was sporting a Gurung design, a sari cum gown studded with dazzling jewels, besides Natasha Poonawalla, who was seen walking the carpet in a rather chic and bold gown. Let's also have a quick look at few responses from the carpet at the gala.
The Met Gala, fashion's biggest night, went off in style in New York. On paper, it's an annual fundraising event for the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute. For you and me, though, it's an opportunity to see the biggest celebrities in the world in their most glamorous, extravagant, and often outrageous ensembles. They are encouraged to dress according to a pre-decided theme. This year's theme is Karl Lagerfeld, a line of beauty, as an homage to the iconic fashion designer. The party is strictly invitation only. A select group of 400 celebrities from across different fields makes the cut each year. This year, several Indian celebrities were invited to bring their most dramatic glam to the Met Gala carpet. Alia Bhatt made her Met Gala debut in a white pearl-embellished gown designed by Prabal Gurung. She called it a labor of love, created using 1 lakh pearls. Priyanka Chopra Jonas has been a regular attendee at the Met Gala since her debut back in 2017. This year, she wore a black Valentino gown with a thigh-high slit, getting one of the loudest cheers. Priyanka was joined by her husband, Nick Jonas, on the red carpet. Rihanna and partner A$AP Rocky arrived fashionably late and still stole the show. Rihanna, who is pregnant with her second child, displayed her baby bump at the world's biggest red carpet event in a white ensemble. Anne Hathaway wore a strapless safety pin dress by Versace, designed by Lagerfeld with white tweed, pearl accents, and flower details. Reality star Kim Kardashian, who wore Marilyn Monroe's iconic dress to last year's Met Gala, came dripping in pearls this year. Other stars like Penelope Cruz, Michelle Yeoh, Nicole Kidman brought their best fashion foot forward. The men also made heads turn at the Met Gala. Tennis legend Roger Federer returned to the red carpet looking dapper. Actor Pedro Pascal wore a red vintage shirt and overcoat from Valentino, but it's his black shorts that caught everyone's eye. And of course, the Met Gala can't be complete without a touch of bizarre. Actor Jared Leto turned up in a giant cat costume as a tribute to Karl Lagerfeld's cat Chopin. Leto even ended up photobombing Anne Hathaway on the red carpet. Singer Doja Cat showed up in a white gown with a cat ear hood. To make her look even more realistic, she wore cat prosthetics on her face. But it wasn't just the celebrities gracing the Met Gala red carpet. A cockroach made its debut and sent the photographers and social media into a tizzy.
All right, let's try and get a sense of what were the highlights and what were the favorites. I'm joined in by a lifestyle journalist from Insider. Chloe Pantazzi-Wolper joins me live from Philadelphia. Many thanks to you, Chloe, for joining in. I'd say the roach did it for me, but as expected, black and white looks were all over the red carpet. Strings of pearls and flowers, menswear inspired looks as well. Which look stood out the most for you? Was it the cockroach?
Well, the cockroach certainly made an appearance, and as someone living in New York, I can certainly relate. Standout looks for me from the evening, you mentioned black and white being everywhere. Chanel's influence was obviously really visible on the night. I would say, obviously, Rihanna turning up very late, but always fashionable. She arrived in a beautiful custom silk white Valentino cape and dress. As always, it was a very dramatic entrance. As she arrived, she had this really voluminous cape on with the camellia floral appliques. Camellias really became popularized at Chanel by Karl Lagerfeld when he was there as artistic director. So that was a really clear nod to his influence at that fashion house. And then she obviously revealed, when taking this off, the ball gown style dress underneath, a voluminous skirt with a 16-foot train. And just to return to the cape, because I'd be remiss to not mention it, but it had 30 camellias, 500 petals, and 25 leaves, according to Valentino. Other looks that really stood out for me, I loved Cardi B's dress. So she turned up really emulating Karl Lagerfeld's signature style. She was wearing a gorgeous Chen Peng studio dress. It looked like a suit up top. So she had that shirt, lapel look. And then the bottom of the dress was this oversized hoop style skirt. And it was again covered in those camellias. And she really just channeled that black and white. I'd also love to just mention Nicole Kidman, because I want to just shout out her look, because she wore a vintage dress. And as a very famous Chanel ambassador, she wore the 2004 Chanel dress that she wore for the number 5 commercial, the Chanel number 5 perfume. This was directed by Baz Luhrmann. It was a really iconic commercial, and Karl Lagerfeld designed that dress. So that was a really personal, heartfelt tribute to him. And then I also wanted to point out Alia Bhatt. It was mentioned just now in your coverage, but her custom during gown, inspired by Lagerfeld's bridal look for Chanel's 92 fall winter collection, just dripping in pearls. She looked absolutely radiant, and there were so many bridal looks on the red carpet, which was really fun, and I thought was unexpected.
Right, Chloe, it's interesting you highlighted those bridal looks as well. But let's also talk about the cats, whether Jared Leto or Doja Cat. A lot of cats too were presented as a tribute to Lagerfeld's cat. Which feline look, in your opinion, stood out?
So I'm a cat person, so I loved the presence of cats on the Met Gala red carpet. I was not surprised to see them. So obviously Choupette Lagerfeld is Karl Lagerfeld's iconic Birmingham cat.
Right.
And unfortunately, she couldn't make it. Her official representatives had posted to Instagram earlier yesterday to confirm she wouldn't be there, much to the dismay of many fans. But celebrities turned out nonetheless, paying full tribute to the the feline icon. So Doja Cat, obviously true to her name, turned up in an actual kind of cat costume. She had the cat ears. She went so far as to have cat prosthetics and makeup that looked incredibly realistic.
It looked straight out of Star Trek.
Yes, she did. And that I should mention that design was by Oscar de la Renta. Yeah. It was a sparkling ensemble and the result of 6 months of work. So much work went into it, as it often does for Met Gala pieces. I also want to just shout out Melina Stearns, who did her prosthetics, because it just looked incredible.
Right.
And a little disturbing, but I think that was the intended effect.
The bizarre has always grabbed eyeballs at the Met Gala.
Absolutely. There has to be some head-turning looks and some discussion. There needs to be wow factor and a little shock. And speaking of shock factor, Jared Leto just showed up in a full-on cat costume,
right.
Leaving onlookers to wonder, who is that? So that was amusing when he took the head of the costume off to reveal who was underneath that. And then Lil Nas X, he was a vision in a crystal look, head to toe, that legendary makeup artist Pat McGrath was responsible for. And he sported just a silver Dior thong. I think he may have been the celebrity wearing the least at the Met Gala this year. And a pair of silver platform boots.
Shock, when you talk about the shock factor, it comes very naturally to Jared Leto. I'm running short of time and I have 2 more questions for you, Chloe. Let's talk about the hair transformations before I move on to a more serious question. Many of these hair transformations stood out, especially that of Jessica Chastain. What in your look actually were those hair transformations that stood out?
So yes, so Jessica Chastain is one of Hollywood's most famous redheads, and she really turned heads at the Met Gala by appearing with platinum blonde locks. I imagine it was a nod to Karl Lagerfeld, and again, just really looked unrecognizable. A lot of celebrities really pulled out all the stops for this Met Gala, and in the fashion world, there was discussion about, is there going to be anything that spectacular, given that the theme, Karl Lagerfeld's such an iconic designer, but the styles at Chanel, very black and white and romantic, but they really delivered. So that stood out to me.
Right. Chloe, let's end with the most controversial bit. People associated with the Met, like its own curator, Andrew Bolton, has said that the Met wants to focus only on the work rather than the words or the man. Is it ethical for the Met exhibition to overlook questionable things that were said by Lagerfeld in the past?
Yeah, this is a really tricky question. I think this is something that's been on the minds of a lot of people, attending the Met Gala, who are preparing for the Met Gala. I think the focus really was kept on the work, because there is an ongoing debate that I definitely don't have time to get into, but, to what degree does the art and the artist, to what degree do those exist together, and how should one judge somebody's art versus them as a person? I will say Karl Lagerfeld was a controversial person. He did say some unfortunate and quite offensive things, and certainly was not the most body positive man. I think, to me, what really stood out last night was that there were attendees who really embraced just being there and loving the designs and saying, you know what, like, I'm here and I'm wearing these designs and I'm body positive. And I thought that was really powerful. Ashley Graham, to me, really stood out in her ensemble and looked just fantastic. But yeah, it's a really tough topic, but I think the focus of this is really on the fashion. And I think, Karl Lagerfeld's times have changed and we're moving forward as a society. So it was great to see celebrities embracing the trends and really making them their own. I thought that was incredibly moving.
Right. Many thanks to you, Chloe. I think you assessed it very well. Thank you for gracing my show. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. Now, in a rather bold move, the Australian government is cracking down on e-cigarettes, this in an effort to stop alarming rise in teenage vaping. The government has announced plans to ban recreational vaping as well as the import of non-prescription vapes and limit nicotine levels. The new measures are intended to ensure that vapes are only sold as aids to help smokers quit. The Australian Health Minister described vaping as the biggest behavioural issue in high and primary schools. The federal budget will be allocating $155 million to protect against harm caused by tobacco and vaping products. Studies suggest that young vapers are 3 times likely to take up smoking. The data also shows that about 22% of Australians aged between 18 to 24 have used an e-cigarette or vaping device at least once. Now, vaping laws vary from country to country. While laws of some countries consider e-cigarettes strictly illegal, others permit its use under strict restrictions. Prohibition is most common in Asia, the Middle East, and even South America. Even now in the United States, Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, has classified e-cigarettes and other ends as tobacco products. They are legal to use and sell, but sales of products produced after 8th of August 2016 are prohibited without a marketing order from the FDA. In 2022, the pre-2016 products that have not received marketing approval will also be removed from the market. From 8th of August 2016, all US states followed the same uniform federal guidelines on e-cigarettes, which are banned in Asian countries of Cambodia, also Lebanon, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Taiwan, Singapore, Jordan, Oman, and Qatar. India has also banned vaping, but the ban seems to be failing so far. A variety of nicotine delivery devices are easily available at neighborhood cigarette shops, and online search of Buy Vape Online throws up plenty of websites selling vapes in India. Now, in India, the Delhi High Court directed the state to conduct more periodical checks in all localities in India's national capital, New Delhi, especially around schools and colleges. In countries like Ethiopia, Uganda, Seychelles, and Mauritius, e-cigarettes are legal to use but illegal to sell. A district board appointed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to oversee development around Walt Disney in Florida theme parks sued the company to void backroom deals favorable to the entertainment giant. Here's leaving you with this report. Many thanks to you for watching.
Just days after Disney sued Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in federal court, accusing the governor and his supporters of retaliation for opposing the state's Don't Say Gay bill, a district board appointed by DeSantis will now countersue.
Since Disney sued us, yes, we didn't sue Disney, Disney sued us, we have no choice now but to respond.
Martin Garcia is the chairman of the Central Florida Tourism Oversight Board.
This is why we called today's meeting, to authorize legal action in response to Disney's federal lawsuit. This district will seek justice in state court here in Central Florida, where both it and Disney reside and do business.
The decision announced the entertainment giant in the state of Florida.
Disney say gay, we won't go away.
The skirmish began last year after Disney criticized a Florida measure banning classroom discussion of sexuality and gender identity with younger children. Florida lawmakers responded by passing legislation that ended Disney's virtual autonomy in Central Florida, where the Disney World theme parks attract millions of visitors each year. In the lawsuit, Disney accused DeSantis and his supporters of illegally using the state government to punish the company for voicing an opinion that should be protected by free speech rights, saying, quote, "The government action was patently retaliatory, patently anti-business, and patently unconstitutional."
No corporation is above the law and the people of this state.
DeSantis, a Republican who is expected to soon declare that he will run for U.S. president, at a press conference Monday said Disney is not entitled to special treatment.
It is wrong for one corporation to basically corrupt a local government, run it as their own fiefdom, be exempt from laws, have all kind of benefits that nobody else has.
You know, in the history of American politics, there have been many efforts to punish corporations and individuals for things they have said that trouble whoever is in charge. It has seldom been done so inartfully and so obviously as in this case.
Ken Paulson is a First Amendment expert at Middle Tennessee State University.
Typically, you know, there is payback, and it's subtle and it's behind the scenes, and the people who are being retaliated against know it's happening, but there's no way to document that that's the real motive. In this case, Governor DeSantis has made this a campaign theme. It's in his autobiography. He's tried to raise funds around it. It could not be more obvious that when the Disney CEO questioned the Don't Say Gay law, it was time to open up the ammunition on Disney.
But as the battle has intensified, it has brought mounting political risks for DeSantis. Republican rivals like former President Donald Trump slammed the governor's stance, saying on social media that he is being destroyed by Disney.
A very warm welcome. You're watching News 18 Global. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Let's begin with our top focus on US. Now, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has denied his involvement in a letter that was signed by 51 former intelligence officials back in October 2020. Remember, it was speculated that this letter was in fact fronted by Antony Blinken. The letter was aimed to discredit the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was also linked to a supposed Russian disinformation campaign. The laptop's content included revelations about potential illegal activities involving the US president's son, Hunter Biden, ranging from parties with prostitutes to business deals that traded cash or for access to Joe Biden during his time as Barack Obama's vice president. He said that it wasn't his idea and that he did not ask for it. That's what Antony Blinken had to say. Meanwhile, the House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan and House Intelligence Head Mike Turner have requested information from the Secretary of State Antony Blinken after new testimony that reveals his ties to a statement that, of course, falsely were Russian disinformation. Let me also quote what Antony Blinken has said in an interview to Fox News. He says that with regards to that letter, it wasn't my idea, didn't ask for it, didn't solicit it. And I think the testimony that the former Deputy Director of the CIA, Mike Morrell, put forward only confirms that. So remember, Mike Morrell's testimony has been a sharp contradiction to what Antony Blinken has said in this interview. Let's try and delve deeper into this entire controversy and also try and assess what Antony Blinken is trying to hint at. And for that, let me quickly bring in my guests. I'm joined in by Christina Carrica-Haley, who is a Democrat strategist, joining me live from LA. Orlando Sanchez, a Republican strategist, joining me live from Houston. Many thanks to both of you, Christina and Orlando, for joining in. Orlando, if I could bring you in first, how do you weigh in on what Blinken's saying? Of course, it's a denial. Is this also now passing the buck on to Joe Biden?
Well, it could be. The bigger problem that the secretary has, of course, is that during the confirmation hearings for the position of Secretary of State, he denied ever having an email exchange with Hunter Biden. It's come to light that there is communications via email between the secretary and Hunter Biden. And the problem for the secretary is lying to Congress is a felony. So he has some issues to address. With regard to the 51 intelligence agents saying, you know, that he requested it, it's a he said, she said, and we won't really know, the bottom of it unless somebody under oath testifies that in fact the secretary did request.
Orlando, I am actually going to delve deeper into those emails, but right now what I want to in fact build on is what Blinken has in fact said in that interview.